let everybody know that if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat, and we'll also have time for Q&A at the end. And the session is being recorded, and it will be available on the DLF YouTube channel. I also wanted to take this minute just to thank Gail from DLF, who's helping us with all the technical aspects of the webinar. And Casey, you can take over right now.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me to share this presentation today. It's been interesting just working on it and thinking of taking what I've learned over the past year and bringing it into this presentation. I'll introduce myself. My name's Casey Davis Kaufman. I'm the Associate Director of the WGBH Media Library and Archives and Project Manager for the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. Today, I'm going to be presenting on working remotely in a pandemic. How can we strengthen our impact, our communication, and our empathy in times of crises? So Anu reached out to me a few weeks ago, inviting me to give this presentation. As someone who was not forced into immediately transitioning into remote work in March 2020, but as someone who's been doing it just a bit longer. Since July of 2020, I've been working remotely in Tennessee for WGBH in Boston. And also, I also now work part-time for the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. I've held my position at WGBH for about 8 years now. And I manage our web development and repository systems team, as well as our engagement and use team. But during this time, during COVID, I've learned a lot about what's needed in terms of shifting our mindsets as managers of people and projects in a remote environment. I'm certainly no expert, and I am still learning more every day, but I'm happy to be here with all of you today to share some thoughts, especially with an emphasis on the global crises that we've all been facing over the last few months. And we will be making this recording available and afterward, as well as a PDF of my slides, so don't worry about taking notes. So before we get started, I thought we could maybe have a grounding exercise, and this is just an offering for people. You don't have to participate. But there are so many distractions around us at home. The lack of face-to-face interaction can be draining, and the added stress of our news feeds and the challenges that we've been dealing with in our personal lives can make it difficult to remain centered and focused on the tasks at hand. Since becoming remote, I've found it beneficial to start my day, and at times throughout the day, to reset and refocus my attention in the moment, and also to just non-judgmentally check in with myself, my thoughts, and how I'm feeling, using meditation and mindfulness practices. So this is also a type of exercise that you could use with your colleagues outside of this webinar. So if you want to participate, I invite you to, we're already muted. I can't see any of you, but if your video is on, feel free to turn it off. And this is called a body scan. So we're just going to feel what's happening within us right now for a minute or two. So let's begin by taking a moment to allow your body to settle into a comfortable position. You may close your eyes or keep them slightly open. Willingly lift your spine and allow the shoulders to open. Today, we're going to practice a short body scan. Checking in with our bodies helps us settle the mind and to notice what physiological sensations and emotions might be present. Begin by taking a full breath in and a long breath out. Now bringing your awareness to the top of your body, your head, your face, your neck, your shoulders, noticing any sensations, movements, any places of holding tension. Now moving down to your arms and your hands, sensing the back of the body, the front of the body, sensing yourself seated, feeling the contact of your body with the chair or your cushion. Now sensing your upper legs your lower legs and your feet. Noticing if there are any particular places that call out for attention. Places where sensations feel most vibrant or dynamic. Scanning to see if there are places where there is a lack of sensations or only very faint sensations. Now sensing the whole body breathing. One complete organism. Finishing with a full deep breath and a long breath out. Thank you. I hope that was beneficial. So moving on, today we're going to be covering a few topics dealing with our current situations working in remote environments. And there may be some of us who are not working remotely or some who are in a phase of returning back to our buildings. I'm going to start off with just a brief intro, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how we've been managing COVID-19 at WGBH so that you have a little bit of context on my perspective. Then we'll discuss some practices and the recommendations for leading teams remotely during these unprecedented times. I'll briefly touch upon some of the ways in which we've moved our ongoing digitization projects forward during this time, and then I'll end with a section on how we found some creative ways to engage our community during the pandemic. And finally, I hope we have some time for spirited discussion at the end of the presentation. The thread of the presentation will consider how during this pandemic, we can continue as managers and within our libraries and archives to maintain and strengthen our personal impact of our collections, knowledge centers, and our services throughout our communities. Effective communication, especially as it pertains to leading people during these times of crisis, will also be an element of focus. And in doing so, how can we practice and demonstrate our empathy with our colleagues and with our communities? So a little bit about me. My MLIS is from Louisiana State University, so I'm originally from the very deep South. I have been working for WGBH Educational Foundation in Boston for about 8 years, which is where I began my career. Over that time, I started out working on production for a documentary series, American Experience. So just backing up, if you're not familiar with WGBH, we are public broadcasting for Boston, for New England, and for the country. You might be familiar with Antiques Roadshow, Masterpiece Theater, Frontline, Nova. These are some of the programs that come out of GBH and are distributed nationally. As I said, I started out in production, but my background is in preservation and archives. So a year after working at GBH, I was so thrilled to become the first project manager for the American Archive of Public Broadcasting, which was initiated by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting in 2013 as a collaboration between the Library of Congress and WGBH to preserve public television and radio programming from across the country. I'm also highly involved in the Association of Moving Image Archivists. I was a past AMIA board member. And as I mentioned earlier, since July 2020, GBH gave me the wonderful opportunity to be closer to my family, to come and be closer with them and move further south again, but to maintain my job working remotely. And I have been so grateful to them for allowing me to do that. So a little bit about our team. We are a pretty small staff. We have about 17 folks on our team, ranging from administration to digital preservation. We also are responsible for licensing our footage. We have a lot of grant projects happening all the time. We're currently, for example, working with Brandeis University on developing a platform called CLAMS to develop machine learning algorithms to automate some metadata about materials in our collection that we hope to eventually give back to the community. But we're engaged not only internally with our productions and providing assets for them to reuse and new programming, but also we're very involved in providing access to our collections to the general public, to researchers, and to educators. So As I said, we're a pretty small staff. We have 17, I think, right now, full-time staff. We all wear a lot of hats. My daily work involves leading my team, collaborating with our partners at the Library of Congress and on our other grant projects, strategic planning, project management, grant writing, managing acquisitions, rights research. I supervise our web and development team and community engagement. So what has COVID-19 situation been like for us at GBH? As I said, most of our staff are typically working in Boston at our building. We have 3 staff who are currently remote, one in Vermont, one in California, and myself in Tennessee. The other 2 are web developers. So since March 17th, we've been working in a remote setting. At the same time, we've been underway with a major digitization project to digitize about 83,000 of our historic programs on various formats. We're undergoing a big technical infrastructure project to build a new repository system. We're midway through a few AAPB or digitization projects, and we're kicking off a couple of new CLEAR-funded digitization projects with folks in New Mexico and Kansas. And at the same time, we still need to respond to production and researcher requests, fulfill circulation, acquire new collections into the AAPB, and engage with our communities. We are anticipating working remotely through the end of the year at least. So many of us did not have coursework in management or leadership, and we certainly didn't have coursework in how to apply these leadership skills in a remote setting during a global crisis. So in the transition of our staff and becoming remote during the pandemic, and in consideration of the murder of George Floyd as just the latest example of brutality and injustices facing Black Americans and people of color, I've been thinking about what leadership practices should we be implementing or enhancing during these unprecedented times. Even the slightest shift in focus, in mindfulness and perspective during this time, I believe, can have a great impact on the well-being of our teams and ourselves. I'll add that my whole experience of working remotely over the past year has just been a lesson in mindfulness, in recognizing the importance of clear and direct communication, of understanding different perspectives in the context of people's situations, of the importance of visual cues, of body language, and intentional verbal communication in all that we do. So let's talk about this a little bit further, as well as some practical activities and goals that we can be pursuing with our teams during this time. And also, as someone who is not an expert, but like us, like all of you, has just been learning to manage over the past year with what we're being dealt with, I invite all of you to please use the chat box. I really would love to see what you all are doing internally, and for us to have a dialogue during this time to talk about what you've been implementing internally as you face these challenges. So in 2017, in an article from the Academy of Management Perspectives, the authors found that both managers and employees enter into remote work with assumptions about anticipated challenges that they're each going to be facing. Supervisors tend to worry that employees won't work as productively in a remote setting. At the same time, remote employees feel that remote managers are out of touch with their needs, and they tend to struggle with reduced access to support from their managers. Another common issue that I know we've all experienced by now is loneliness, which is one of the most common complaints about remote work. And as we all know by now, there are so many distractions at home. Many of us have children, animals, our spouses may be working at home with us, and we all may not have dedicated office space to be away from those distractions. So really quickly, I just want to check in to make sure, Anu, I think you got some links if you want to post those. Okay, yeah. Great. So we as managers need to understand that everyone's situation is not the same. And by now, after 5 months of working remotely, I think we all have that understanding. Some people have had to homeschool, others have had spouses who have been laid off and are dealing with the added economic pressures. Others have dealt with illnesses in their families, or are stressed by the fact that they have family members who are high risk or who have to work in high risk environments. Others are dealing with family members who refuse to abide by mask wearing guidelines. It can all take a toll, and we're all not aware of what's going on with each other at any given time. People are dealing with unprecedented challenges at home and in our personal lives right now. And we all know this. This is not new information. But while it isn't new, I've personally benefited from regularly checking in with myself and internally reminding myself when maybe I get frustrated about something, about what's going on with maybe a project has slowed down, but reminding myself of all of these scenarios, and these are just a few that I've mentioned, many that I haven't mentioned, which people are experiencing right now. And I think that's needed in order for us to maintain a constant state of empathy with our colleagues. So one thing I've learned since becoming remote is that it takes more time to be a good and effective manager while working remotely. Quick drop-ins at your desk aren't possible, so communication, direction, and meetings need to be more intentional. In a remote setting, I've also become more aware of the differences in the way that people think and process information. During COVID, it's become evident that some people transition to remote work more easily than others for a variety of reasons. And going back to that earlier slide about the assumptions and challenges, some staff do need a bit more hands-on guidance and direction when they're not in a remote office setting. And that's totally fine and understandable. Providing the direction needed in order for people to succeed in their jobs is your job as a manager and my job as a manager. Trello has been a useful tool in keeping track of goals and activities for individual projects and also for personal to-do lists. In my regular meetings with staff, for those who do maintain their work in Trello boards, we usually share our screens and we review each card and where it stands within the workflow. We collaboratively add and edit cards in their Trello boards to keep track of goals and milestones. And we also set target dates by which goals should be accomplished. And we do so collaboratively, understanding their, in consideration of their personal workload and personal challenges they might be facing at home right now, alongside the bigger picture of our projects. And again, referring back to that earlier slide about managers' concerns about productivity, the key to effectively monitoring productivity during these times should really be the outcomes and not the activity. If you don't receive 15 emails from someone in an average 9 to 5 day, it doesn't mean that they're not putting in their hours. So in providing direction to staff during COVID, many of us have also taken the opportunity to elevate some projects that might have been on the back burner. We've reviewed policies. We've also been reviewing our deeds of gift to see how we can make them more impactful long-term. We've enhanced access to our collections and developed better documentation and cataloging. This has given some of our staff the opportunity to work on projects that would otherwise be outside of their scope, but in some cases their primary function can't be performed at home. We've taken into account, however, that social isolation coupled with monotonous work can be even more draining. So we have multiple ongoing projects that can be worked on for limited periods, giving some flexibility for people to switch things up. And finally, these past few months have heightened our stress, they've heightened our emotions and our challenges. So giving staff the opportunity to work on strategic, co-created projects that they find meaningful and enjoyable can really be cathartic and rewarding. One main takeaway with regard to communication when working remotely is that in general, it takes more time and effort to get information from your colleagues. We don't have the ability to drop into someone's office and we have to rely on other forms of communication. And different people have different communication styles and strengths. Even getting answers from what are usually simple questions can feel like big obstacles. This extends not only from task-oriented communication, but also to interpersonal relations between people. In addition to ensuring that your own communication is clear, direct, and responsive, keep an eye on communication among your team members to the extent appropriate to ensure that they are also sharing information across their team as needed. Using internal wikis or Google Suite allowing for centralization of documentation and meeting notes that would otherwise be isolated in emails or even just in our minds. Providing communication technology options for various types of communication also benefit the remote work environment, from Slack, which we use for informal messaging between individuals and groups, and also sharing GIFs in the morning. That's a lot of fun, communication via GIF. And then we use Zoom for personal and group meetings, allowing for eye contact and visual cues, which help reduce that sense of social isolation and provides a way to have some complex or sensitive discussions. Since becoming remote, I've also created what I call my virtual office. It's just a Zoom link that all my internal colleagues have bookmarked in their browsers. If they click the link, I immediately get a notification that they've joined my room. And then if I'm in a meeting, they'll see that I'm in another meeting, but I can immediately join in and have a quick chat with them. It's just a virtual way for them to drop into my office anytime they need to. And keep in mind that some people are just shy and they likely won't reach out unless there is an established venue for them to be part of a larger group. And others are living alone right now, making the isolation during these times just particularly challenging for them. So as we've discussed, being a manager in a remote environment requires more effort and intention. To help establish structure for our team, we've scheduled daily meetings with the entire staff. These happen every morning and have been really helpful in bringing people together. And it's actually made us, I feel, more close to one another. It's also allowed us to check in with each other on progress across various projects, troubleshoot technical challenges together, and stay in touch with directives coming from our executive management. Prior to COVID, we actually only had a team meeting like once every 3 weeks. So we actually think we're going to continue doing this well beyond COVID. I also have a check-in with my own team with each staff person 3 times a week. On Monday mornings, we have a 30-minute check-in, and then we have stand-ups on Wednesdays and Thursday mornings. This is with each staff person individually. During the longer check-ins, we review Trello boards and develop a plan for the week. And then I've also realized that during COVID, it really is okay for these meetings to take a bit longer when needed. As someone, I'm personally very task-oriented, and it's been a learning curve for me to be able to check in with my feelings and remember to check in with other people. But I've tried as best as possible to every day check in with them personally, emotionally, and just to connect with them and see where they're at, see how they're doing. If you've ever done oral history, the methodology of asking open-ended questions can also be utilized to just check in with folks and create space for them to seek input and guidance on what they're working on. It's also important to have a dedicated note taker at online meetings, which goes without saying, but I've also found that it's more difficult for the note taker to be able to participate fully. So when you're the facilitator of meetings, it's important to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to engage and participate. So being mindful of body language on screen can help recognize when people want to engage, but maybe they don't feel like comfortable to, or that they're able to at that point. Be fully present in your meetings. And that's something that I definitely struggled with. Each meeting takes time away from doing other things. So setting agendas and documenting outcomes is so important, as is ensuring that your colleagues feel like they're being heard. Looking at another monitor while you're in a meeting makes people think that you're distracted. So using body language, eye contact, mirroring, and paraphrasing techniques to fully engage and ensure clarity across meetings is going to be really beneficial. And finally, recognize that online communication is really exhausting. In a Zoom meeting, our brains are doing more than they would be doing if we were in a face-to-face meeting, limiting our vision to 2-dimensional versus 3-dimensional, increasing our cognitive load and requiring more conscious capacity. Looking at our own face on the screen can actually increase and intensify our own emotions. So you can also turn off your own view of your own video in a Zoom meeting to kind of mitigate that sensory overload. And if a lot of your communication is 2-dimensional with your team, that is being on Zoom all the time, encourage your staff to just get outside and look at things that are actually present physically with them. Consider also the impacts of online meetings and recognize when they're not needed. So as a manager, continually, as we all do and try to do, offer and encourage emotional support for your team. I'm not sure if you've, I'm pretty new to some of these concepts, but an emotional contagion is something to keep in mind when you're communicating difficult or perhaps even stressful information down to your team. The way that you communicate information is contagious. Anxiety is contagious. So think about the language that you're using and be very intentional. And when you have to communicate difficult information, take the time to prepare potential responses, potential questions that you're going to get during the meeting so that you can be fully prepared to engage with your team in what they're dealing with when they are receiving information. Acknowledge what they're dealing with, understand that you're still not aware of everyone's situation, and continually provide confidence and positive affirmations to your team. Endorphins are great stress relievers. So a few ways that you could provide some emotional support are early release Fridays. We've been able to take the last 3 hours of our Fridays off during the summer, which has been wonderful and something we can look forward to. Provide guidance to your team on how to build a DIY standing desk, or provide resources for ergonomics to help them understand how the way they're sitting at their workspaces has an impact on their body and their minds. Encourage stretch breaks. Send cards or cookies or stress balls to them in the mail. Also, as a manager, your network is probably bigger than the network of the team that reports to you. So in a regular world, we'd be going out meeting new people all the time, but this is not a normal world. So intentionally try to connect people on your team with other people, help them build their network and help them grow their network and meet other people during a time when that's not really possible outside of work or outside of our homes, really. And encourage them to be involved in professional development, taking webinars, and getting engaged with their professional associations. So that's all I have in terms of leading teams remotely. Also talk a little bit now about how we are continuing to move our projects forward during this time. So we're all, I'm sure now, familiar with some of the challenges that we're all facing with COVID-19 impacting our digitization projects and other projects that we might be pursuing. Hiring of staff for new projects has been delayed. We've got lack of physical access to our materials. If we're outsourcing digitization, our service providers have been closed, or some of them have. And then we've also, in our situation, working with large audiovisual collections, we've been unable to perform quality control of large preservation files as they're coming in from our digitization service providers. So like everything else, the pandemic has taken some things out of our control. It's impacted our timelines, our established workflows, and more. But at the same time, the pandemic has given us some breathing space that we otherwise wouldn't have had, and allowed us to shift our focus on projects that might have been on the back burner, but also to reevaluate our workflows, our quality control procedures, our acceptance criteria. We've been able to develop a really good relationship with our service provider to perform quality control on some formats that have been challenging or that we might not have worked with before, such as like a multi-track audio tapes that we just haven't developed workflows around in the past, because those have been, we haven't been prioritizing those for digitization until now. We've been developing better infrastructure and evaluating our cataloging practice. So as I mentioned earlier, we've been working with our service provider to identify lower risk formats for which we do have copies that could be brought to an engineer's home for digitization. We've also safely sent in some staff to prep batches of tapes to be picked up by our vendor. This is my colleague, Rebecca Fremow, who was able to go in and send in 4,400 tapes to George Blood a couple of weeks ago. The slower pace of digitization has allowed us to catch issues early on during our projects, refining our deliverables and metadata that we're receiving. We've also been sending staff in carefully as deliveries are received to perform fixity checks on large digital files, and also copy our preservation files onto LTO tape. But we've also been investigating some automated transcoding tools that will allow us to spend less time in the office and do some of this work more in an automated fashion. And then we've also, as I said, spent more time just reevaluating our metadata and performing some large-scale metadata cleanup. So finally, what I wanted to talk a little bit about is, during this time, how can we continually demonstrate and strengthen our impact in our own communities? We all are aware of the unprecedented challenges that are being faced in our education systems right now. And I think this is really an opportunity for us to demonstrate the value of library and archival collections. So these are just some things that I wanted to share with you that we've been doing during COVID to provide value to parents and teachers and students who are looking for resources now from home or for virtual learning environments. We've hosted office hours. So it's just a Zoom call, an informal way for people to hop onto our Zoom, to ask questions about our collection, and for us to navigate them to content that they're looking for. We share our office hours on social media. We've also become aware of some Facebook groups that were created in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the educational impacts of it. There's one group called Amazing Educational Resources, which has tens of thousands of parents and teachers that have joined that every day are just looking for resources related to what they're teaching to their students that are online and available. We've also hosted a Reddit AMA, or Ask Me Anything, where we've gone online and engaged with scholars who are interested in learning more about our collections and materials related to their research. You can also partner with your local school district to provide content from your collections, and also reach out to your local PBS or NPR station. Many of them are creating educational resources right now on PBS Learning Media in response to COVID, and are creating programming around to help deal with this challenging time of having access to education. So I also wanted to share a few resources where I know that educators are looking for content. As I mentioned earlier, Amazing Educational Resources is a Facebook group and also a website. So you can go to the website and fill out a form. And actually, when this resource launched, about 20 other websites found out about the AAPB and wrote articles about them and listed us in, top 10 online resources for online learning during COVID-19. So putting our collections out here is going to help increase awareness well beyond these few platforms. But the National Humanities Center also recently launched a new online educational resource digital library where you can create records. It's a portal for having access to content on other sites. So we're creating PDFs of our digital exhibits and special collections and creating records within their portal that provide direct links out to our collection. The American Federation of Teachers Share My Lesson platform is very similar. So we've been doing that there as well. And National History Day just launched their 2021 theme, Communication and History. So I also recommend finding out how you can share your collection with students who are developing National History Day projects. Our local public libraries are also constant resources for us to share information about our collections with lifelong learners and with people in our community. One thing that we've done is create a library communications toolkit. And actually, all of you who are working at higher education institutions, I'd be happy to share that with you. It's basically some information about the AAPB that I know some academic librarians have used it to incorporate into LibGuides that they're creating, but we've also shared this with public librarians, and it's helped generate more awareness. We provide logos and other information about our collection and specific digital exhibits that might relate to collections that they're already curating around, and curricula that they're building resources for. And then finally, 5 months ago, I know many people were just looking for online ways to engage with other people. Now that we're 5 months in, I think people have started to get more familiar with how to spend their time if they do have time and how to be engaged with other people, with their families, and also just within their community. But we have worked on trying to build community events and engage our community in ways that we weren't prior to COVID. So what we've done is create a volunteer form on our website where people can sign up to just receive information about how they can be engaged in some of our efforts, such as Wikipedia edit-a-thons. We actually had a Wikipedia edit-a-thon in collaboration with Wikimedia DC last month. Those folks are amazing. They're willing and excited to collaborate with libraries, archives, and museums. I definitely recommend reaching out to your local Wikimedia group to see how you can work together and connect your resources with content on Wikipedia. We've also been hosting transcriptathons, and these are all online events where we bring people together to work on these shared activities. And then they can also go home afterward and do it individually. We also have had cataloging sessions. We've talked about hosting virtual screenings, but you could also host online reading or listening sessions. And then I also just want to add that there are so many free and reduced fee conferences happening right now, including the DLF conference that's upcoming, but also conferences that we normally wouldn't have had the funding to go to or otherwise just wouldn't have thought to go to, like history conferences or educational conferences. Think of this time as an opportunity to look across silos and boundaries and see how we can reach out and share with one another. So think about attending conferences that you otherwise wouldn't have had the funding to do so. And then finally, I want to talk about response to the historic events of 2020 and elevating and preserving relevant collections about what's going on. So in consideration of the injustices that Black Americans and people of color and Indigenous people are continuing to face, we should think about how we can elevate in a very respectful way and in collaboration with those communities, materials that document their experiences in order to help further knowledge and literacy of and understanding and empathy during this time period. Also, I would also suggest examining your Google Analytics. That can tell a lot about what people are looking for right now. If you go to Google Analytics and you narrow down to mid-March to now, look at what people are searching for on your site. How are they getting to your site? And do more of that. If people are looking for content around protesting or around Black Lives Matter movement, think about what material you might have in your collection that you can elevate and help make more discoverable to people who are already looking for that type of information. And then prioritize those relevant collections for digitization and public access. I also want to mention that you can also, this is a good time. You wouldn't think it would be, but it actually is, I've found, in my personal opinion, a good time to reopen conversations with donors who might not have had time prior to COVID or may not have been as perhaps open to engaging and contributing materials to your archival collections, but they might be more willing now. I've actually found that people are more willing to engage now than prior, or in some cases. And then collect stories and other content created in response to the historic events of 2020, either through community history projects, through collecting of photos or videos documenting protests in your community, or through oral history projects. Finally, you can also, we all should be taking time right now to evaluate our current practices in terms of how and whether we are implementing anti-racist practices in our in how we're describing our collections, in how we're presenting our collections, and engaging with communities that they document. So this is a time period where we all need to be reflecting and thinking very critically about this, individually within our institutions and collectively. Finally, I just want to add that we last year or 2 years ago, we developed these advisory committees. We developed a scholar advisory committee, an educator advisory committee, and a stations and producers advisory committee. We meet with them 3 times a year. This was actually funded through a Mellon project where we just developed these initiatives, but they've been continuing because it's been really wonderful having people that we can rely on, especially during this time. We've had informational calls with the folks on our education committee and our scholar committee to get their insights into what challenges people within their communities are facing and how we can respond right now. So that's just another thing that has been really beneficial for us prior to COVID, but also their impact has even been further enhanced during this time period. And then this is just where I wanted to end today. This is a quote that has had meaning and has inspired me for quite some time now with regard to the climate crisis and the challenges that we're dealing with across humanity. But it also relates to the events of 2020. Fear makes us run, it makes us leap, but we need somewhere to run to. And without that, fear is only paralyzing. So I just want to end with that, because as managers, I know, we all have our personal lives to live, and hopefully we have those places that we can run to outside of work. But as managers, we can provide a space for our colleagues to feel during a time that is so uncertain and so stressful that they can continue to make meaningful impacts within their professional lives. So hopefully we can think about the tools and resources and guidance we can provide as a place for them to run to during this time period, both within the workday and also just be an encouraging voice beyond. So that's all I have for everyone. Thank you. And I also just want to thank the DLF for inviting me to share this today. And I'm really looking forward to talking more with you all now and hearing what thoughts you have. Thank you.
Thanks, Casey. That was really nice presentation. I just wanted to let everybody know that I think we will be unmuting everybody. And if you have any questions, please, you can either put it in the chat or you can indicate in that in the participant list by raising your hand, and we'll take your questions.
Yeah, I've given folks the ability to unmute themselves, so you should be all set.
Thanks.
I will also just end now and say that a lot of this we all already know after 5 months of working remotely, but I know at least for me, it was helpful to put it into dialogue and also to have a space where we can talk about what practices we're implementing and both practically and also mindfully as we're continuing 5 months into this. So I'm looking forward to hearing what thoughts that you have, and I hope it wasn't just too much reiterating things you already know.
Casey, you did talk a lot about working with your team, and I was just curious, what about the other, I mean, you do interact a lot with the other departments in WGBH, and how has that been working with the staff in the other departments?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I work really closely with our legal counsel. Understandably, things take a bit longer during COVID, but I schedule regular meetings with them. We have a really good relationship with our legal department and have meetings every other week and really consider them part of our team. That has really been beneficial to us in thinking about how we can make our collections broadly available online and engaging them in decision making on the project and helping give us tools that we can use to make the collections discoverable without their input on every single item. So yes, legal counsel, also our colleagues with the Library of Congress. And as I mentioned earlier, we have ongoing projects with the Riverside Church in New York through a CLEAR grant, University of Georgia. So yes, meetings have definitely increased during this time, and I'm sure for many of you too, but a lot of the work that we had been doing prior to COVID was remote. So maybe even with my staff, not my staff, I don't like using the word my, but the team that I work with, I feel it might have been an easier transition because of the work that we do across the country already is already kind of remote. Robin asked, can you talk about how you balance meeting with your team and making sure they have what they need and finding time to get your work done? Yes, we try to have our check-ins, we stack them in the morning so that we're not meeting all day and having to switch gears from meeting to actually getting work done. So I am in Central Time, so I get started a little bit earlier than everyone else who's in Eastern Time, just so that everyone can be done with meetings by like 10 o'clock in the morning or 9:30 in the morning, and then they have the rest of the day to get their work done.
We have another one. Casey, do you want me to read it out or?
Yeah, I'm just reading it now, internalizing it. That's a really good question. I actually use the word pivot too much, and I'd appreciate a different word because I agree it isn't very descriptive. Any other thoughts from the group on any suggested language uses here? Well, thank you, Deborah, for offering that question and something that I want to think about. Very true.
Hi, Casey. This is Kim Kennedy from Northeastern. Thanks for the presentation. I have a question about training. So I'm going to need to train some people in scanning, but my goal is to do that remotely. And so I have some ideas about taking videos of myself and setting it up so I can take control of the computer if necessary, having the training be just by video on a separate device. I was wondering if you or anyone else has any other ideas.
I would, as I mentioned earlier, I'm involved in the Association of Moving Image Archivists, AMIA, and there will be 2 upcoming webinars being offered through AMIA around setting up, training on setting up a remote digitization environment. So I would definitely keep an eye out on that. It'll be taught by Jackie J, who was previously working at Bay Area Video Coalition, and she's fantastic and has done a lot of trainings and has been working to do those remotely during this time. So I would definitely recommend checking out those webinars.
Do you have any links that you can provide, Casey, for that?
Yes, let me pull up.
You can send it to me. I can, it can be a part of the slides maybe.
Okay. And I don't know if they've published it yet, but I'll send you the link where it will be available. Yes, so through my work with University of Tennessee, we have a graduate student working on the oral history project that we've been continuing to move forward during COVID. We he was actually already on board prior to COVID and transitioned just seamlessly. So I have not yet had experience training students on starting up an internship and especially doing a scanning internship. But we will be bringing on a couple of interns in the fall as well, and thinking about how to make sure that they feel engaged and part of the team during this time period, and that they're getting the mentorship that they would otherwise have been getting in a face-to-face environment as well. And we'll be bringing them onto our Slack channels and having regular Zoom meetings with them as well. But yes, that's another new area that we'll be exploring in the near future as well. Thank you, Louisa, for sharing that link. Okay.
So yeah, thank you so much, Casey. This was really interesting and Okay, I think we have something else now.
Thank you, Virginia. I'll also add that we're also thinking of what types of projects would be impactful for a student to work on, and also something that would be easy to train them on during this time period while they're working remotely. So we're thinking of having them enhance some of our existing digital exhibits by doing additional research, create finding aids for collections. There's actually a program in Massachusetts called the Aspire program. It's through the Massachusetts General Hospital that places students who are on the autism spectrum in internships. So this is another program that we work with almost every semester, and this will be the first time that we have an Aspire intern working with us in a remote environment. So that's also been something we've been strategically thinking about, what types of activities would be beneficial for them to work on in consideration of what individual person's strengths will be, and but that's something that we think about with each person that we place. But I'm also excited about, I just love that program, and I wish it was in every state. I think it's just amazing, and I can also share a link to it as well. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Casey, and thank you, everyone. The project managers group will have another event before the end of the year. So we'll send the information about that. And thanks, Casey. This was an excellent presentation.
Thank you. And thank you again for inviting me. And it was wonderful to be part of this group today, and hope to be more engaged in the future. And hope that you don't have any more Zoom meetings this afternoon, but I do. I have another one in 6 minutes.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gail.